Welcome to the Politics Guys. I'm Michael Baranowski, a political scientist at Northern Kentucky University. Today I'm talking with Dan Flynn, Editor-in-Chief of Food Safety News. Welcome to the show, Dan.
Good to be here.
I'd like to start maybe hearing a little bit about your background and how your interest in food safety started.
Well, my personal interest started basically through a lawyer friend, who is far better known in this than I am, Bill Marler, who's the attorney in Seattle, who's kind of seen as the guru of the food safety, business from the side of the plaintiffs, people who are suing the food companies who have poisoned people. He and I have known each other for many years, and in about 1998, he and people that he had sued, the lawyers had represented Jack in the Box, Dennis Clark or Bruce Clark and Dennis Stearns. The three of them had just come through suing each other and going at it for about 5 years after the Jack in the Box outbreak, and lo and behold, they formed their own law firm after that, and the Marler Clark law firm came into being in 1998. And then Bill knew me as a journalist, because that's kind of what I'd been doing when we first met, and he wanted somebody to go out and go to the sites of outbreaks. This was a little bit before the internet was as dominant as it is now, and just in terms of having somebody with their feet on the ground, it was important for what they were doing. So I spent probably about 5 years just going around when an outbreak would be occurring and try to find where the victims were gathered and their families and such, and figure out what was actually happening. And then the law firm became involved as needs would arise. But that's kind of how I came to it. Otherwise it was something that I never would have never would have heard of. So
there aren't too many people who say I'm going to get involved in food safety when in my career and so forth. But can you tell me a little bit about Food Safety News? I mean, how long the organization's been around, what it does, that sort of thing.
Well, it's Food Safety News, which is www.foodsafetynews.com, is a digital news site. And it has been in existence for almost a decade. And what had happened is that kind of two things. One is that as the 90s went on, we got into, that whole period behind us. I then became involved with just doing communications things for the law firm. And we kept kind of upping our game in terms of our presence. And it kind of almost out of jest in about 2008. I don't even know who was making the joke. Was we've done it enough. We should become a news site. And then we went, hey, that's a bad idea. And really, what drove it for Bill Marler was a number of, I don't want to say major, but significant newspapers like the Des Moines Register and Portland Oregonian, other regional newspapers that had either excellent food writers that covered, food and agriculture like the Des Moines Register did, or public health, had dropped those positions. So he was finding, there's just a hole opening up here in terms of, a lot of places where if it didn't become a big enough story that was covered, the outside, it wasn't getting covered at all. So that's kind of what we went into it. So we were originally, totally sponsored by the law firm, and then about 5 years into it, we got connected with a agency in Kansas City. It's done a great job of making us an advertising sponsored entity, and it's just kind of gone on from there. So, and we, our approach is old fashioned, I like to say, because I'm an old print journalism guy, and it's just, we're out there to cover the news, and, we're not, we always go at things from, as complete a look as we can give to any story. And it's built a pretty good following. So
No, I'm wondering, most listeners probably don't follow food safety very closely, but there was a major piece of food safety legislation, I would say, passed in 2011. It's the Food Safety Modernization Act. And of course, that's over 6 years ago. So people might think, well, it seems like maybe there was an issue. Congress dealt with it. And so, would you say that the passage of this legislation brings U.S. food safety regulations up to where they need to be?
Well, I would say we're going to find out. And what's somewhat surprising to a lot of people is that even though it was signed by President Obama, I think on January 4th, 2011, the Food Safety Modernization Act is kind of only now coming into actual existence because, FDA, as any other federal agency, was required to go through a laborious rule writing process in order to bring the details of it to fruition, and that basically took 5 years. So we've only in the last year started to see the full force of some of these changes come into being, and some of them are we're going to have to see what happens. One thing that the Food Safety Modernization Act does is it gives the same force of law to imported food as the domestic food, but how do you do that? I mean, does that mean that when there's an outbreak involving a parasite that's probably on some kind of a fresh produce that's probably coming from Mexico, does that mean that we can put FDA inspectors in the ground or on the ground in Mexico as fast as we could if they were in California?
Right. Yeah,
kind of a question.
Yeah, I think that's
Anyway.
that's a great point because a lot of people, I think, don't realize that the passage of the legislation, that's sometimes the quick and easy part when it can take years or sometimes even more than a decade for some of these things to actually get through the regulation writing process and affect real people on the ground.
Definitely, and I think it's to be fair to FDA, I think they've done as thorough a job in the rule writing as possible. I say that in the sense that they really take into account, the reality that's out there, and they, on several different aspects of it, they pulled back and, started and, stopped and got a, different point of view. So, it's really now that we're going to find out, from here on, we're going to find out what it's all actually going to mean once it's tested in the field.
Right.
So.
Some people would say that food safety regulations are unfair, especially to smaller producers, because these smaller farms and so forth don't have the resources to deal with all that, administrative red tape and procedures and big agribusinesses do. And there's a concern that this actually can force these kind of smaller producers out of the business. And I'm wondering, do you think our current food safety system makes life harder for small local producers?
Well, first, one thing that's important is that when it comes to fresh produce, the Food Safety Modernization Act specifically exempted any farm that was producing more or less than 25,000, I think it is, to exempt the small producer. That was called the Tesler Amendment, named for Montana Senator John Tesler. And so there's a bit of sensitivity to that. The other thing is that, even though you can certainly say this puts FDA on the farm, in a big way for the first time, what they're doing is they're really doing contracts with state ag departments who have traditionally kind of been on the farm from the get-go to represent what FDA has to do. So I think in terms of, anybody having dramatically new things, hitting small producers is probably not going to, be a concern, but it's definitely out there. I mean, and one of the places that it's, come up and remains as kind of a, area that's being worked on is water quality and what, if not so much irrigation water, but water that's used by small producers and how you deal with that. So that's something that FDA has been giving more time to.
So about these inspections, I don't think most people might have an image in their head and so forth. I'm wondering how rigorous are they? I mean, are they the kind of thing that, for instance, are they generally unannounced, or do producers have time to prepare and maybe get things right before the inspector comes, or how does that work?
Well, generally, it's generally an FDA inspection. It's not unusual that there's not an announcement. They don't say call you up and next month we're coming in. What they do is they probably come in the afternoon of the day they want to start. Say we're here. Let you know we're here, because they typically take from a couple of days to a couple of weeks that they're going to be on premises, doing what they do. So there's not maybe if I don't know what you would do the night before to
Right.
get ready.
That'd be pretty tough, yeah.
And what they're going to do is pretty exhausting. I mean, in terms of it's thorough. For example, they're going to do environmental testing where they're doing in swabs from different areas like food contact areas, or they might look at if they see condensation in a ceiling that's dripping down onto a food contact area, they might go there. But you would never know as the producer where exactly they're going to go with that kind of testing. So I don't know how you'd prepare for it.
So this isn't the kind of thing where you can, slip the guy at 20 or something like that and say, "Hey, Bert, can you look the other way at this or that?" That in your view doesn't really. That's not the kind of thing that really happens.
Not. I mean, the way that I think FDA works in teams and just the whole kind of culture that they've developed, I think pretty well prevents that. There's been instances, with USDA we have, for meat and for poultry and for eggs and et cetera, or now even catfish that falls under USDA inspection under the Food Safety Inspection Service. That's where you have a continuous inspection. So you get, the same inspectors in the same plant, every day. And I think that's, even though there's not many examples of it, but I can name a couple where, for example, an egg inspector in Iowa was bribed by the Austin Jack DeCoster company called Egg Quality. That was back during the 2010 when there was a massive recall of shelled eggs for salmonella. So this egg inspector was, given several $100s to approve something, but it would seem that you're more likely to build a relationship with somebody that's on the premises every day than you are somebody that's coming in that you haven't probably seen before.
Right, sure, that makes sense. Yeah.
Anyway,
now what do you think of? I guess you'd call it sort of a libertarian argument that what we really need in our food system is actually less government regulation and just replace that with more transparency. So, as long as consumers have good information on the procedures and the food safety records of producers, that the market's going to take care of food safety a lot more efficiently, a lot more effectively than sort of a complex bureaucratic system of regulations. Is there, in your sense, anything to that or not?
Well, the problem with it is that it frequently comes up with the raw milk example. If we've had states that say, well, you can't, or you just give them a slip that says that there's been no regulation for this, raw milk, and the producer's not, the farmer's not liable for it, etc. Well, if kids get sick with E. coli and end up requiring hundreds and millions of dollars worth of medical care, who's picking up that bill? I mean, even a lawyer like Bill Marler can't sue a little farmer that doesn't have any insurance and doesn't have any assets and everything. So what ends up happening is that those cases end up, on the public one way or the other. So, and I'm not, just as background, I'm not personally, hostile to these folks that like this raw stuff, what I always tell them is, I like raw oysters too, but I'm not feeding them to a 6-year-old.
I'd like to thank today's sponsor, Blue Bottle Coffee. The days, they're getting shorter, weather's starting to get cool, at least here in Cincinnati it is, and nothing complements a crisp, cool autumn day quite like a cup of coffee, but not just any coffee. Don't settle for any coffee. I'm talking about coffee that's so delicious, so flavorful that you realize, oh my gosh, I've been drinking subpar coffee my whole life. I'm talking about Blue Bottle Coffee. Blue Bottle Coffee is great coffee, and I say that as a certified coffee snob. Now, I don't actually have a certification, but you know what I'm saying? I'm very picky about coffee, right? They have insane dedication to coffee. They have most delicious, they have sustainable beans, and they get shipped to you within like a couple of days of actually being roasted. That's super important because fresh beans are by far the best. And so right now, Blue Bottle Coffee has a great deal for Politics Guys listeners. Go to bluebottlecoffee.com/TPG for $10 off your first coffee subscription order. And while you're there, be sure to check out their digital holiday store because Blue Bottle Coffee makes a great gift. bluebottlecoffee.com/TPG. That's bluebottlecoffee.com/TPG. You brought up lawsuits, and I'm glad you did because I wanted to ask you about that because there's sort of I guess you could say a related argument that as long as people are able to sue producers for unsafe food, just the very threat of those lawsuits should be enough to keep the food supply safe, and that, and that more regulations are just going to impose unnecessary costs. And of course, producers pass those costs along to consumers. And the thinking is, well, we can do away with all that as long as there's that reasonable threat of lawsuits, which will keep the producers in line all on their own.
Well, yes, that's it's definitely an argument, but if you go back to the day when E. coli in beef was just rampant, Bill Marler and a couple of other attorneys across the country probably cost the beef industry $1 billion between the 3 or 4 attorneys I'm thinking of. But that was not enough to cause the beef industry to make the changes that it needed to make. The beef industry had to have the desire to make those changes on its own. Bill Marler used to, I don't know what he'd say, joke, but he used to make the case that, he wishes that they would put him out of business and solve the problem rather than, just allow these hundreds of millions of dollars to become a cost of doing business. And thankfully, the beef industry is, they virtually eliminated the problem. I mean, it's always going to be a problem, but not in the way that it was. The days when we were having, millions and millions of pounds of hamburger being recalled with E. coli contamination, appears to be in the past, and it's through the actions that they take. And I think that the hurt that they were feeling from the trial attorneys was not the major reason. So,
right. Anyway. So in other words, what you're saying, what it sounds like you're saying is that basically that, you call it the cost of doing business, that if it's just lawsuits, that they can kind of build that into their model and it's not going to be enough to change their behavior on its own. But if you combine that with a reasonable regulatory regime, then you might actually get some longer term changes to make the food supply safer.
Correct. And they, it wasn't an instant, easy problem for them to solve. And one thing that USDA was good at was setting up the environment to where they could try different interventions and sort of as they go. I do think that they were driven by when you see pictures of 12-year-old kids in the paper that are on ventilators, from eating a hamburger, that gets pretty hard to tell. Or there was a case of this lovely dancer in Minnesota who, one hamburger crippled her. So they were driven by that. They just wanted to, they get it behind them.
Yeah,
so.
Definitely. So, I forgot to ask, it's one of the most important questions, perhaps. So you deal with this stuff all the time. What do you see as the biggest food safety concerns or issues right now?
Well, the main one, I don't know exactly how to say this, whether it's I want to say complexity or what the demand is for food, and how complex that's getting, is a better way of explaining it than just saying globalization. But we as a country are becoming more, demanding of different products from different places in massive quantities. I mean, we now import, basically about 20% of our food, virtually 98% of our seafood. It's becoming, the world is our oyster kind of a demand, and I think that's getting harder and harder. The faster you run, you still can't keep up with it. But we're not gonna change because, we like having blueberries in our pancakes that are fresh in January when it's, when they're not being grown in the United States, and we just have more ethnic diversity where people who have come here bring with them their food tastes and, go looking for those products. And that's just it's kind of like trying to drink out of a fire
hose.
hydrant.
So basically, that just creates a lot of problems, I would guess, in terms of regulating that. Because because I know a lot of seafood, right, is processed in China and things like that. So it's a lot harder for us to ensure the safety of food that's packaged overseas than stuff that's being packaged and processed here in the United States.
Right, and China always comes up. It's kind of interesting that if we go look at our graduate schools, we have a lot of the best people in various biological and laboratory sciences are these Chinese students who are going to go back to China. They're going to be running their food safety system, but we don't trust them for our imports. I say that somewhat in jest, but it's amazing what people react to, and that all figures into very definitely to what FDA and the other agencies will have to do, because we have very much bought into a world food safety system, and we lead it. There's no doubt about that. Whether you talk about the European Union or Asia, they're looking to FDA for where we're going, but the public is not always there with us. I mean, so anyway.
Now, what do you think about current FDA Commissioner Scott Gottlieb? I mean, I know he's only been in office since mid-May, but I'm wondering if you formed an impression of how committed he seems to be to enhancing the safety of the food supply.
Well, let me say first that it became somewhat, I mean, I don't want to make more out of this than it is, but the Food and Drug Administration is basically, I don't want to say the sexy part, but the drug and medical device part, which require, various pre-approvals from FDA, seems to usually hold the fascination of the FDA commissioner. And we and others began making somewhat of an issue out of that over with Dr. Hamburg, who was the commissioner under the Obama administration for 7 to 8 years. So we were kind of expecting, that when this happened. First, Scott Gottlieb is he's exactly who you'd expect to be FDA commissioner. He's a incredibly bright, Mount Sinai physician. He was the deputy, commissioner, before, anybody that was sitting around saying, who was going to be FDA commissioner, would have expected him. It was not going to be, there were rumors about, hedge fund managers or whatever being named. That didn't happen anyway. So one thing we have noticed is he does seem to be plugging into food. I mean, he's made, he went to the meeting that the state agricultural directors had. They have a very prestigious organization that was dealing with some of this, and he went and gave a major address there. He's done a couple of other things that seem to be indicating that he's going to be giving equal attention to food as he does to the other side of the house, and that's I think is going to be it's going to be welcomed by if I would say that if he goes next year to the international food the IT it's one of the most prestigious groups. I'm having a blank for the name.
I always get the acronyms messed up myself. I know.
Couple of conferences where we're sort of seen as where you need to be to stay up to date on these things. If he goes to those next year, that will probably be the first time that a FDA commissioner has been there in a decade or so. And I think that's what the food safety community is looking for, and if that happens, it will be encouraging. So,
well, it's good to hear that early signs are encouraging there. Let me end on a hypothetical here. Let's say you were FDA commissioner. What steps would you take to make our food safer?
Well, my steps would be in kind of action steps, not organizational. There's been a organizational recommendation out there by many different entities for a long time that goes nowhere, which is that instead of having 15 food safety agencies at the federal level, we should just have one. But I don't think that's ever going to happen. But my idea would be to have small teams, small interagency teams that would really be empowered to chase something to the ground. And by that, you take the area of, we're importing all this fish. We always have issues of fish processing and having issues when they get inspected. Why not have a team that's, FDA and marine fisheries, and others that would make sense, 4 or 5 people, who would start chasing some of those kinds of issues to the ground and would have the full support of the FDA commissioner or whoever else it took, to make it happen, instead of them being, the FDA finds something out in inspection and then they, run it up to the district, and the district goes, back to DC, and then DC goes to, find the other agencies that should be involved. And, by then it's 2 or 3 years later. That's actually been an issue that, I know it's been the Office of the Inspector General, the General Accounting Office, but, that FDA has been kind of written up on, which is, why can't these things be, done quicker and finished quicker? Why do these cases stay open so long, and presumably the entity continues to put out adulterated food? But I think if they would just not be so structured and be more flexible, you could,
It sounds like, that I think is something we hear not just in the food safety community, but for a lot of government. And you run into those problems, I'm assuming, with turf battles and interagency communications and that sort of thing. And those can be really thorny problems, I'm sure.
Right. And it just adds time. And if you have a finding that adulterated food is being put out, which is something that we've put people in jail for, why do we let it go on for as long as we do? And that's, like I said, that's what these audits have found in the past. So
now, I think, isn't it with the Food Safety Modernization Act, for the first time, the FDA has the authority to pull foods and not have the recalls be voluntary? I think that's what I recall reading about that, and that would be a change from past policy. Yes.
That is true, and it's also true that they now have the ability, which they've done a number of times, to withdraw the registration. And if you don't have a registration, you can't sell food. So that has been a really important one in these cases, particularly in these cases where you have I'm thinking of the peanut butter plant down in New Mexico that they did that too. You're putting out a product that ends up as an ingredient in lots of other products. So if the firm isn't recalling it quick enough, you can both recall it and turn it off by suspending the registration.
Right. So I would imagine, though, that we wouldn't expect to see a lot of FDA-initiated recalls because the producers themselves would want to do it themselves before they were forced to do it, I would guess.
And that's been the tradition. I mean, if you're in a position where they want you to do a recall, you may as well do a voluntary recall.
Yeah, exactly.
And,
yeah.
Save yourself a lot of headache. But
yeah, definitely. So it sounds like that we've made some strides and that there's some good stuff in FSMA, and it's just a matter now in the next few years of seeing how that actually plays out on the ground as these portions of the law actually go into effect.
I would agree. We have sort of this baseline number that we're starting from, which is 1 out of 6 Americans get sick from foodborne illness a year. 128,000 are hospitalized. 3,000 are die, killed. So we should look for those numbers to start to go down. If in the next 5 years,
right,
would be the time when we find out.
I guess that would obviously be the mark of success, because that's what it's all about, making sure that people don't become ill or die because of the food that they eat.
Right, because our whole approach is to go from when we were previously reactive to a system that should be preventative.
Yeah, absolutely.
And anyway.
All right. Well, with that, we will close. Dan Flint, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me today.
Appreciate it. Glad to be here.
That's it for this Politics Guys interview. Thanks for listening. We hope you liked what you heard and that you'll check out today's sponsor, Blue Bottle Coffee. Hurry to bluebottlecoffee.com/TPG for $10 off your first coffee subscription order. Listener support is a huge help to us, and we truly do appreciate it. If you're interested in joining our great group of Politics Guys supporters, you can go to politicsguys.com and click on the Patreon link. And if you want to support the show without spending anything, you can share this episode with your friends and followers, or pass along our new show posts and tweets on Facebook and Twitter. Leaving reviews and ratings on iTunes also really does help out a lot. If you want to get in touch with us, you can do that at mail@politicsguys.com, or our Facebook page, where you can message us and we post stuff throughout the week. That's facebook.com/politicsguys page. We're also on Twitter @politicsguys. And the executive producers of the Politics Guys are Michael Baranowski, Jay Carson, Trey Orndorff, and Bruce Johnson. Today's show is produced by Michael Baranowski. We'll be back with a new show on Saturday. We hope you'll join us.